Hi everyone, today we're going to have a look at 2.4.4, the multiplier. If you think back to the previous video that we looked on the circular flow of income, you might recognise this diagram over here. Well, what have we got? Let's have a quick refresh. Well, we have this interaction of households and firms and this flow concept, this flow of money from households to firms through the purchase of goods and services, and firms to households through payment for factors of production, often labour, so wages and salaries. And the money flows round this circular flow of income. Well, what we're going to look at today is, as this money flows, and as we put money into the circular flow, how many times does it go round the circular flow before it all leaks out? Because we know that money leaks out of an economy. It leaks out through savings by consumers and firms. It leaks out through taxation that the government will take off consumers and firms. And it will leak out through imports, so spending abroad. And we're going to have a look this week at how this is effective. Worth saying to start with, this is going to be a quantitative lesson. So we're looking at maths-based skills here, and there are formulae involved. You've got to make sure that you do know the formulas and you can use them. You wouldn't be provided with the formulas in the exam. So let's have a look. So let's imagine that money is put into the circular flow of income. Well, we've got three ways here: investment, government, or exports. Let's just assume here that money is put in by the government. So the government might increase their spending, or they might reduce the taxation, but in some form the government is putting money in. So more money is going in. So let's imagine that the government goes on a big spending spree and puts money in. Well, what does that do? Well, this leads to money flowing round the system here. And if there was no withdrawals, leakages, you'd end up with that money flowing forever, round and round. Well, that's going to cause problems, and we'll look at that in future lessons. And if you can get ahead, see if you can compare this to aggregate demand and see if you can look at the theory today and how it impacts. But for now, we can assume that that money is flowing round the system. Well, what happens as it flows round? Well, it reaches us, the consumers, and we've got a decision to make here, haven't we? For every pound I'm given, what do I do with it? I could spend it, so I could consume it. Or, in this model, there are three other things that could happen to that money, to that pound. It could be taken back by the government. So some of it, if I buy things that have VAT on them, some of that money has gone back to the government. Obviously, I'm going to pay my council tax, my car tax. I'm going to pay all sorts of taxes along the way, so some of it will disappear in taxation. I could save some. A lot of this is going to be related to consumer confidence. If consumers aren't confident, their savings might go up in terms of proportion of income. Maybe not the figure, the gross figure of savings, but the proportion of income. If consumers aren't confident, they may well save more. Or I could buy imports, so I could buy things from abroad. Worth mentioning, it's not always obvious when we're buying things that are imports, because when we're buying things on the internet, we don't always think about exactly where the items are coming from and exactly where our money is going. They're not always obvious, but we've got a decision to make. So when we look at this, you can see over here, these are the formulas that we need to know, and we're going to talk through them now. So for every pound that we receive, we are going to do one of four things. We are either going to consume it, so we've got marginal propensity to consume, which is where we keep the money in the system. The money flows in the system still. So we've got MPC. We've got MPS, marginal propensity to save, which is where we're saving the money. We've got the taxation, marginal propensity to tax, which is where the money is lost through taxation. And we've got MPM, marginal propensity to import, which is where we're buying things from abroad. So worth noting, savings, tax, imports are all leakages. They are all flowing out of our circular flow of income, otherwise known as withdrawals. MPC, consumption, is the only thing, the only bit that is going to lead to that money flowing round. So how do we do it? Well, let's imagine money is put in, which becomes an income for consumers. So we've got this income, we choose what we're going to do. Well, to work out the marginal propensity to consume, for each pound, what are you going to do with it? How much are you going to spend? We can do the following. Marginal propensity to consume, change in consumption, so how much are we now spending more, divided by our change in income. And that'll give us a figure below 1, or 1 if we was to spend all of it. So we're going to get an answer here. Well, that will tell us something. That will tell us what proportion of our money, the extra money that we get, are we spending? Well, the rest of it must be leaking out, must be withdrawn. So we can look at these three. So we've got marginal propensity to save, change in savings over change in income. We've got marginal propensity to import, change in import over change in income, and marginal propensity to tax. These are just arrows to move out of the way. Change in tax over change in income. Now, if you was to add all of these up, you should get an answer of 1, because the change in consumption, add the change in savings, add the change in import, add the change in tax, should equal or must equal the change in income, assuming that these are the only 4 places that this money can go. Well, what does this mean for us? Well, the more that is spent on consumption, the more money that is left in to flow round. And this is where the concept of the multiplier starts. So the money keeps flowing around. The more that is taken out through one of these, the less money is flowing around. The less times that money will flow around the system. And this is the multiplier. The multiplier says if we inject a set amount, we're unlikely to see that level of spending exactly. It's usually going to be more because of MPC, meaning that money might be spent multiple times. If you look at old coins, we've spoke about this before, you'll see sometimes coins in circulation dated 1980 whatever. Well, those coins have been spent multiple times in the system. They've probably been taken out and put back in, of course they have, but they've been spent more than once, and that's what we can look at here. So when we get to this, we then get this marginal propensity to withdraw, MPW. Well, we know that our leakages, our withdrawals are MPS, MPT and MPM. So the 3 added up give you MPW. So these 3 here, MPS, add MPM, add MPT. These 3 are, as you can see here, these 3 are marginal propensity to withdraw. So that restricts it now. We are either consuming or we're withdrawing. If you add up the MPW and the MPC, you should get an answer of 1, because that encompasses all of the money. This then leads us on to the multiplier. The multiplier is the key formula. Now, to be able to calculate the multiplier, you may have to calculate one of the components from within. So it's important that you can do all of this up here, and do make sure that you've got your formula the right way around. If you get an answer above 1, you know you've got it upside down. So the multiplier, there are 2 formulas for the multiplier. Both are in the specification, both you need to know. So what have we got? We've got 1 over 1 minus MPC. And of course you'd need to calculate your MPC to know what that is. So, put a different way, if we know what MPC is there another way we know the formula? Well, let's imagine that MPC was 0.4. We could get 1 divided by 1 minus 0.4. Well, 1 minus 0.4 is 0.6. If MPC is 0.4 and MPC add MPW is 1, what's that 0.6 represent? Well, it actually represents MPW. So we can have 1 over MPW. And these 2 formulas will give you the exact same result. They calculate the same thing. And what that tells us is how many times does this money flow around the system? How much extra spending are we getting? Really important information for a government to know if they're going to use fiscal policy that we'll cover later. How much extra money do they need to put in? If they want 100 million of spending and there's a really high multiplier, they're not going to need to put in 100 million because the money's going to flow more rapidly. Have a think, what leads to a higher multiplier? Well, it's all dependent on the withdrawals and the consumption, often linked to consumer confidence. If consumers are confident, then they are more likely to consume. If they're more likely to consume, the multiplier will be higher. So in times of growth, in times of confidence, you're going to see a much higher multiplier. Well, this is a problem because if we're going to need government intervention, it infers that there might be an issue within the economy. Think about the moment. Are consumers confident? No, they're not. What are they doing? They're saving. So the multiplier is going to be much, much lower, which means that if the government is putting money in, they're going to have to put more money in to get the same effect. Have a think. How does this link to aggregate demand? We'll look at it next lesson.